It was the beginning of the school year, and the air was filled with a mix of anticipation and nervous energy. The halls were buzzing as students found their way back to class after the summer break. Among them was Alex, a quiet young student who had just transferred to the school. His family had moved from a small town, and Alex wasn't sure what to expect from this new chapter in his life. At first glance, everything about the school seemed massive to Alex. The tall hallways, the larger classrooms, and the overwhelming number of students who seemed to know each other so well. As he walked through the crowded corridors, Alex felt like an outsider. It wasn't that anyone had been unkind, but there was an unspoken divide that Alex could feel. Most of the students already had their tight-knit groups, and Alex couldn't help but notice the subtle differences in how he was treated. He was used to this feeling of being different, but that didn't make it easier to endure. One of the biggest traditions at the school was the annual debate competition. It was a prestigious event, one that was taken very seriously by both students and teachers. The competitors were expected to present strong arguments, think on their feet, and hold their ground in front of a large audience. Alex had always been a good student, someone who was known for his sharp mind, but he wasn't exactly someone who would ever think to put himself in the spotlight. He wasn't the loudest in class, and he certainly wasn't the type to stand up in front of a crowd and speak out. For the first few weeks, Alex stayed mostly to himself, focusing on his studies. He didn't mind the quiet moments, the time spent in the back of the classroom or sitting alone during lunch. It gave him a chance to observe the other students without feeling pressured to fit in. But it also gave him time to think. And one day, while walking down the hallway near the auditorium, something unexpected caught his attention. The posters for the debate competition were up on the wall, bright and bold. They caught his eye immediately. The posters listed the competition date, the rules, and the previous champions. As he stood there staring at the colorful paper, Alex felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't expected. Debate. It was such a far cry from anything Alex had ever done. He wasn't an extrovert, and the thought of standing in front of a crowd and speaking was terrifying. But something about the challenge appealed to him. He had always been interested in the power of words, the way arguments could shape people's thoughts and influence opinions. He knew he could research the topics, organize his thoughts, and speak clearly, but could he do it in front of a room full of people? The more Alex thought about it, the more the idea intrigued him. He didn't need to win. He just wanted to prove something to himself. But what if people didn't take him seriously? What if they laughed at him? The fear of being mocked was a real possibility, especially when he knew that there were a few students who were known to dominate the debates. These students were confident, outspoken, and had a reputation for being untouchable in the competition. They were the kind of students everyone expected to perform well, students who had been at the school for years, known for their charisma and their ability to argue their way out of any situation. Alex wasn't like them. He was quieter, more reserved. He didn't have that natural, confident air that others seemed to possess, yet the idea of stepping up to the challenge gnawed at him. He thought about it for days, the posters on the wall always catching his eye as he passed by. The competition was fast approaching and the registration deadline was near. His heart raced just thinking about signing up. But then, in a moment of courage, Alex decided to take the leap. He filled out the registration form, his hand trembling slightly as he wrote down his name. It felt like such a small, simple thing, but to Alex it was a huge step. He had always played it safe, always stayed in the background. But this was different. This was his chance to prove to himself that he could do something outside of his comfort zone. The day he turned in his form, he couldn't help but wonder what people would think when they heard that he, of all people, was participating. Would they laugh? Would they think it was a joke? The idea of being ridiculed haunted him, but it didn't stop him. He had made his decision. Days went by, and Alex couldn't shake the feeling that people were talking about him. He overheard a few whispers in the hallway, followed by a soft giggle. It made his stomach turn. He had always been the type to avoid attention, and now he had put himself in a position where all eyes would be on him. The more he thought about it, the more he questioned his decision. What had he been thinking? Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. As the day of the competition drew closer, the weight of his choice began to sink in. He wasn't sure if he was ready. The other students seemed so prepared, so sure of themselves. He had never seen them falter in class, never seen them question themselves. But then again, maybe that was just an illusion. Everyone had their doubts, right? Alex spent late nights preparing, reading up on the topics that would be covered in the debate. He practiced his speeches in front of his mirror, speaking slowly and clearly, trying to sound confident. But his reflection always seemed to stare back at him with uncertainty. Every word felt like it could be his last. Every argument seemed to fall flat. As much as he tried, there was always this nagging thought at the back of his mind. What if they laugh at me? But as the night before the competition arrived, Alex realized something. He wasn't just preparing for the debate itself. He was preparing to challenge the idea that he didn't belong. He was preparing to show himself and everyone else that he was more than just the quiet student in the back of the room. He didn't know how the debate would turn out, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever came next. The days leading up to the debate were filled with tension. As the competition date drew closer, Alex couldn't help but notice the whispers in the hallway. It seemed like every student in school was talking about the upcoming event. He had heard a few people say things like, "Well, did you hear? That new student signed up for the debate." And others would laugh it off with, "Oh, he's not going to stand a chance." At first, Alex tried to ignore it, keeping his head down and focusing on his preparation. But as the competition loomed closer, the pressure started to build. He could feel the weight of their skepticism bearing down on him. Each day when he passed by groups of students chatting in the hallways, he noticed how their conversations would go quiet as he walked by. The whispers seemed to follow him everywhere. It wasn't just the students he could sense doubting him. Even some of the teachers who probably didn't mean to, but spoke in a way that made Alex feel as though they didn't expect much from him. One teacher had even mentioned casually in class, "I wonder who's going to win the debate. I'm sure the usual suspects will come through," with a knowing smile. The usual suspects were the confident, outgoing students who always dominated competitions like this. It was clear that Alex wasn't considered one of them. Still, Alex pushed forward. He kept practicing, writing out his speeches, rehearsing in front of his mirror at home. He thought about every possible scenario, the arguments he could make, the questions he might be asked, and the possible rebuttals he could offer. But the doubt still lingered in the back of his mind, and he couldn't escape it. What if they were right? What if I don't belong here? It was the night before the debate, and Alex lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The quiet of the night only made the doubts louder in his mind. The room was dark, but the echoes of the students' laughter filled the space. He could almost hear their voices teasing him. It was as if he could already feel the sting of their mockery, the laughter that would follow his every word on stage. His stomach tightened and he thought about backing out, about finding some excuse to withdraw. Maybe he wasn't ready. Maybe he was setting himself up for failure. But as he lay there, Alex remembered something his father had said to him just before they moved. "It's not about what others think, son. It's about what you know you can do, even when they doubt you." Those words echoed in his mind, and slowly, his anxiety started to calm. He didn't need to win. He didn't even need to be the best. All he needed to do was show up. He had already taken the first step by registering. Now all he had to do was step onto that stage, speak his truth, and show that he had the courage to participate. No matter what anyone else thought, he knew that taking that step was an accomplishment in itself. The next morning, Alex stood in front of his closet staring at the clothes hanging there. Nothing seemed to feel right. He wanted to look confident, but he wasn't sure how to achieve that. He opted for something simple, a clean shirt and a pair of pants. He didn't want to draw attention to himself with flashy clothes. Instead, he chose to rely on his words. "It's not what I wear, it's what I say," he thought. And with that, he walked out the door, ready to face whatever came next. When Alex arrived at school, the atmosphere felt different. The buzz of excitement filled the halls as students moved in and out of classrooms talking about the debate. He could feel the eyes on him, but this time it was different. It wasn't just curiosity. It was the sense that people were now waiting for him to fail. They didn't expect him to do well, and the thought of disappointing them was terrifying. His legs felt heavy as he made his way to the auditorium where the event was being held. The closer he got to the door, the louder the voices seemed to grow. The students were crowded together, chatting and laughing. Some were practicing their arguments. Others were making last-minute adjustments to their notes. Alex's heart pounded as he walked into the auditorium. It was large, with rows of chairs facing the stage. The audience would be seated right in front of him, and the spotlight would shine directly on him. Just imagining the situation made his palms sweaty. But there was no turning back now. He had already signed up, and now he had to go through with it. As Alex walked past the other students, he couldn't help but overhear their conversations. Some were confident, talking about how they were going to dominate the event. Others were discussing what their opening lines would be. But no one seemed to notice Alex as he made his way to the back of the room. He found a seat and tried to calm himself, taking deep breaths to steady his nerves. He felt out of place, as though everyone around him had it all figured out. What am I even doing here? He wondered, staring at his hands. His notes felt like a foreign language, like words that had no meaning. The time finally came, and the competitors began to line up at the front of the room. Alex's name was called, and he slowly rose from his seat. The moment he stood up, he could feel the eyes of the room on him. His stomach churned as he walked to the stage. His mind raced. Don't mess up. Just don't mess up. They're all waiting for you to fail. But then something unexpected happened. As he stood there adjusting the microphone, he realized that the only thing he could control was what came next. He couldn't control the crowd's reaction or their expectations. What he could control was his courage. He could choose to stand tall and face his fears. The first few seconds were the hardest. He opened his mouth, and for a moment no words came out. It felt like the room was holding its breath, waiting for him to mess up. But then, with a deep breath, he started to speak. Slowly at first, but his voice began to grow stronger as he found his rhythm. The words came easier now. He wasn't focusing on the audience's laughter anymore. He was focused on the ideas he was sharing, the arguments he had spent so much time perfecting. With each word, he could feel the weight lifting from his shoulders. He wasn't the best, but he was doing it. He was showing up, and that was enough. Alex didn't know how the debate would go, but as he spoke, he started to believe in himself more. The audience that had once doubted him, the ones who had whispered and laughed, were now quiet. They were listening. They were hearing what he had to say. And in that moment, Alex knew that he had already won, not by winning the debate, but by daring to take that first step. The days following the first moment Alex stepped onto the stage for the debate competition were a whirlwind. His mind had been spinning with the events of the day, and he couldn't help but replay every second over and over. There were moments when he felt a rush of pride. I did it. I actually did it. But then, there were other moments when doubt crept back in. Did I sound nervous? Was I too quiet? Did anyone even care about what I had to say? He had finished his portion of the debate, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. The judges had yet to make their final decision, and Alex had no idea where he stood. He tried not to think about it too much, but the anxiety lingered. The thought of being judged, of having his effort evaluated, felt like a weight on his chest. In the days that followed, Alex's routine seemed to revolve around the competition. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to improve. Maybe he wasn't ready, but he had committed to this challenge, and backing out now wasn't an option. There was something about the idea of finishing what he had started that kept him pushing forward. After school, Alex would head to the library, a place that had always been his refuge. It wasn't filled with chatter like the cafeteria or hallways. It was quiet, peaceful, the perfect place to think, research, and write. But even here, the doubts didn't leave him. What if I'm not good enough? What if my argument is too weak? What if they don't take me seriously? The words swirled in his mind as he sat at a table surrounded by books. He opened one of the books he had been reading for his research. It was on the same topic he would be debating. He had read the first few chapters, but today he couldn't focus. The words blurred together no matter how hard he tried. He let out a frustrated sigh and rubbed his temples. He was tired. His body ached from the long hours of practice. His hands were starting to feel stiff from writing out notes and speeches over and over. But then a thought occurred to him. What was the point of all this practice? Was it just about winning? Was the point of this competition really just about who could argue the best, or was there something more to it? Maybe, just maybe, it wasn't about winning or being the best. Maybe it was about pushing through the fear and showing up, despite what others thought. Maybe it was about proving to himself that he could face challenges head-on, no matter how difficult they seemed. That thought gave him a bit of relief, a sense of clarity. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to impress anyone else. He just needed to be true to himself and give it his all. Still, it wasn't easy. The closer the competition got, the more nervous Alex became. His thoughts seemed to spiral out of control. He found himself doubting his ability to perform. Could he do this? Could he stand in front of an audience and speak confidently, without stumbling over his words? Was he really prepared? The fear of failure seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. One evening, as he sat at his desk, Alex looked at the clock. It was already late, but he wasn't finished with his speech yet. He still had so much work to do. He had rewritten his argument so many times that he couldn't even remember how many drafts he had gone through. What if this is the wrong approach? What if I missed something important? His hands were shaking as he read through his notes again. He felt overwhelmed by the weight of it all. His phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him away from his thoughts. It was a message from his mom. "You've been working hard, Alex, remember? This isn't about being perfect. It's about doing your best and taking pride in that. We're proud of you no matter what." The message brought a small smile to Alex's face. He didn't realize how much he had needed to hear those words. His mom had always been there for him, reminding him that the effort was what truly mattered, not the outcome. He took a deep breath and looked back at his notes. Something shifted in him. The nerves didn't completely go away, but they became easier to manage. "I can do this," he thought. "I don't need to be perfect. I just need to do my best." The day of the competition finally arrived. The nerves returned, stronger than before. It was hard to think straight as he got dressed that morning. He tried to eat breakfast, but his stomach was tied in knots. Every little thing seemed to make him more anxious. Even the way the sun shone through the window seemed to remind him of how much was at stake. But as much as he tried to ignore it, he couldn't escape the feeling that today would change everything. When Alex walked into school that morning, the atmosphere felt charged. The buzz of the other students was palpable, and he could hear snippets of conversations as he passed by. Some students were excited, others nervous. Some were talking about their arguments, while others joked about how easy it would be to win. Alex could feel the weight of the expectation. The stakes felt higher today than ever before. As he made his way to the auditorium, he tried to focus on his breathing. In and out. You can do this. But the closer he got to the door, the more his heart raced. His palms were sweaty and his head felt light. When the door opened, the bright lights of the auditorium hit him. The room was packed. It was more intimidating than he had imagined. The rows of chairs were filled with students, teachers, and even some parents. They were all looking at him. The moment he stepped inside, Alex felt the pressure intensify. The stage seemed so much bigger than he had anticipated. The spotlight felt like it was on him, and the eyes of everyone in the room were focused on him. But he knew he couldn't turn back now. His name was on the list. He was here, and there was no going back. The judge at the front of the room called the first name, and the competition began. As each participant took their turn, Alex tried to stay focused. He listened closely to what they said, taking mental notes. They were all good, confident, sharp, and well-prepared. The doubt crept back in. What if they're better than me? His heart raced. But with each person who spoke, he reminded himself of what he had practiced. You can do this, he thought. You belong here. Finally, his name was called. He stood up, his legs feeling weak, and walked to the front of the room. As he approached the podium, his hands were shaking, but he did his best to steady them. He cleared his throat, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the audience. For a brief moment, it felt like time stood still. He could feel the weight of every eye on him, but then he took a deep breath, and it was as if everything fell into place. The words he had practiced for so long started to come to him. He wasn't perfect, but he wasn't trying to be. He was speaking from the heart, sharing what he had learned and hoping that his voice would be heard. And in that moment, Alex realized something. It wasn't about winning the competition. It wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about showing up, facing his fears, and doing the best he could. No matter what happened next, he knew he had already won. Alex's heart beat wildly as he stood behind the podium, the lights above him brighter than he expected. The room was silent, every eye in the auditorium focused on him. The familiar weight of anxiety started to settle back in. But something was different this time. The nerves were still there, but they weren't as overwhelming. This time there was a sense of determination, a quiet resolve that he didn't quite have before. His fingers gripped the edges of the podium as he took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The moment he had spent so many weeks preparing for was finally here. But in the back of his mind, he realized that he wasn't nervous just about speaking. He was nervous about what would happen when he finished, about how people would react to him. Would they still laugh? Would they think he didn't belong here? These were the doubts that had been swirling in his head since he first signed up, but now they felt distant. He wasn't just doing this for the others, he was doing this for himself. As he started speaking, the words felt natural. He had been over these points so many times that they almost seemed to flow from his mouth without any effort. His voice, at first shaky, gradually became steadier. He spoke clearly, slowly, giving each word the attention it deserved. The arguments he had spent hours crafting began to take shape, and the nervous energy that had filled him earlier turned into something different, a quiet confidence. Alex wasn't a natural performer, but he had learned that confidence wasn't about pretending to be something he wasn't. It was about owning who he was and being proud of what he had to offer. He had prepared for this moment, but he wasn't trying to be someone else. He was speaking as himself, and that was enough. The room was still quiet as he spoke. Alex could feel the eyes on him, but they didn't feel as heavy as they had when he first walked in. He had come to realize that the audience wasn't his enemy. The laughter, the doubts, the whispered comments, they were all in the past now. This was his moment, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. The audience, at first skeptical, had started to listen more closely. He could see some students leaning forward in their seats, nodding as they followed his points. It wasn't that Alex was saying anything revolutionary, but his calm delivery and the strength of his arguments seemed to make people stop and think. Even the confident students who had dominated debates in the past were paying attention. It wasn't about being the loudest or most dramatic. It was about being clear, being focused, and speaking with conviction. As Alex moved through his argument, he noticed that some of the tension in his shoulders began to ease. He was no longer focused on the possibility of failure. Instead, he was focused on making his points clearly and effectively. He had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to let the work speak for itself. The more he spoke, the more the audience seemed to connect with his words. There was no applause, no loud reactions, yet there was something almost tangible in the way they were paying attention. The silence in the room wasn't uncomfortable. It was respectful. Alex knew that something was happening, but he couldn't put it into words just yet. All he could do was keep going. Then, as he reached the final part of his argument, Alex took a breath and looked around the room. He could feel his confidence building as he reached the climax of his speech. He had done the hard work. He had prepared, practiced, and pushed through every self-doubt. And now in this moment he was standing in front of these people telling them exactly what he believed. In the back of his mind, a small voice whispered, "It's okay. You've already won." And for the first time, Alex felt the truth of those words. He wasn't going to let their laughter, their doubts, or their expectations define him. He had stepped up, faced his fears, and given it everything he had. The final sentence of his argument was met with a still silence. Alex took one last breath before stepping away from the podium. He could feel the weight of the room on him for just a moment longer, but then something unexpected happened. There was a soft ripple of applause. It started slow, almost tentative, but it grew louder as more people joined in. Alex stood there stunned as the applause filled the room. It wasn't a wild, overwhelming cheer. It wasn't the kind of applause that signaled a clear victory. But it was something else, something deeper. It was the sound of respect. The students who had once doubted him, the ones who had whispered and laughed, were now acknowledging his courage. They were recognizing his effort, and for Alex that was more valuable than winning the competition. When the applause finally faded, Alex stepped back to his seat. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and relief. His heart was still pounding, but it was a different kind of pounding. He had done it. He had faced his fears, given his best performance, and earned the respect of his peers. And while he didn't know how the judges would score him, he knew that he had already won something far more important than any trophy. As the other competitors took their turns, Alex couldn't help but notice the shift in the room. There was a new energy, a quiet understanding that hadn't been there before. The competition wasn't just about who had the best argument. It was about stepping up and showing courage, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. And Alex had done that. He had proven to everyone in that room that courage mattered more than anything else. When the competition ended and the judges began announcing the winners, Alex's heart started to race again. He had done his best, but he couldn't help but wonder how the others had performed. He had put everything into his speech, but would it be enough? The judges announced the winners, and as they called out the names of the top 3 competitors, Alex held his breath. His name wasn't called, but as the last name was announced, the judges turned to the audience and said, "While we have our winners, we would like to recognize one more participant who showed exceptional courage and effort today." Alex's stomach dropped. He didn't expect this. The judges went on to describe how he had approached the competition with a level of grace and determination that many of the others lacked. They spoke about his ability to stand up in front of a crowd, despite the odds, and deliver a speech that was thoughtful, well-organized, and passionate. Then they said something that Alex hadn't expected. For his bravery, we'd like to award him the Courage in Debate Prize. A wave of applause erupted around him, and for a moment Alex was frozen. He hadn't won the competition, but in that moment it didn't matter. The respect he had earned, the acknowledgement of his effort, was more valuable than any award. It was a validation of everything he had worked for, everything he had believed in, and everything he had proven to himself. As he walked off the stage, still in disbelief, Alex realized that it wasn't just about the debate. It was about showing up for himself, about taking a chance even when everyone else doubted him. And in doing so, he had won far more than he ever could have imagined. The days after the debate competition felt like a blur. Alex had been living in a whirlwind of emotions since the event. The applause, the unexpected recognition, and the feeling of having faced his fear. It was all so much to take in. As the initial shock wore off, he realized that something had shifted inside him. It wasn't just about the prize, the recognition, or even the debate itself. What truly mattered was how he had changed through the experience. The morning after the competition, Alex woke up with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt before. He had always been someone who kept to himself, someone who stayed in the background and avoided attention, but now he felt different. The fear that had held him back for so long was still there, but it wasn't as paralyzing. It was as if facing that fear, standing in front of an audience and doing something that scared him, had broken the hold it had on him. For the first time, Alex realized that the power to change wasn't in avoiding fear. It was in confronting it head on. As the week went on, things started to feel more normal. But Alex knew that he was no longer the same person he had been before the competition. The students who had once laughed at him were now treating him with a different kind of respect. It wasn't that they were suddenly his friends, but there was a shift in how they saw him. The quiet, reserved kid who had once seemed invisible was now someone who had stepped into the spotlight and earned their acknowledgement. It wasn't just the students who noticed the change. Some of his teachers, who had always been supportive but distant, began to treat him differently. They started to engage with him more in class, asking for his opinion on topics and encouraging him to speak up. It was as though they had recognized his potential in a way they hadn't before. Alex didn't mind the attention, but it wasn't the attention itself that made him feel good. It was the way people saw him now, not just as the quiet kid in the back, but as someone who had something valuable to say. One afternoon, after a class discussion, one of his teachers approached him. She smiled warmly and said, "I saw the debate, Alex. You did a great job up there. I know it wasn't easy, but I think you showed a lot of people something important, yourself included. You belong here just as much as anyone else." Those words meant more to Alex than anything he had heard in a long time. It wasn't just the praise, it was the recognition that he had earned his place. That, more than anything, was what had been missing from his life. He had always felt like he was on the outside, looking in, but now he felt like he was part of something bigger, something important. In the days that followed, Alex found himself thinking about what it meant to truly belong. He realized that belonging didn't mean fitting in with everyone or meeting certain expectations. It didn't mean being the loudest or most outgoing. It meant being true to who he was, showing up even when it was hard and accepting himself for all that he was, quiet, thoughtful, and brave. It was a lesson he hadn't learned until now, but it was a lesson that would stay with him forever. The experience also changed how Alex viewed failure. Before the competition, the idea of failing was something he dreaded. It was something that seemed insurmountable, something that could define him if he didn't succeed. But now he understood that failure wasn't something to fear. It was simply a part of the process. By showing up and doing his best, Alex had already won. He hadn't let fear dictate his actions, and that in itself was a victory. As he walked through the school halls, Alex noticed the way his peers interacted with him. The students who had once ignored him or made fun of him now seemed to acknowledge him in a new way. Some of them even approached him, offering congratulations for his performance in the debate. It wasn't the kind of attention he had expected, but it was meaningful. They didn't see him as the quiet student who couldn't speak up. They saw him as someone who had the courage to step out of his comfort zone and take a risk. One day, as he was walking through the hallway, a group of students stopped him. They had been part of the group that had laughed when he first signed up for the debate, but now they were smiling at him in a way that felt different. One of them said, "Hey, we were wrong about you. You really did a great job in the debate. We didn't think you had it in you, but you proved us wrong." Alex wasn't sure how to respond at first. Part of him felt like he should say something clever or humble in return, but the truth was he was just grateful. Grateful that they had recognized his effort and that they saw him for more than just his quiet demeanor. It was a small moment, but it meant a lot to him. He smiled and said, "Thanks. I appreciate it." Later that week, Alex found himself thinking about his family. His parents had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. They had encouraged him to pursue his interests, no matter how different they seemed. They had always told him that success wasn't about being the best. It was about doing what you love and doing it with integrity. Alex realized that in many ways his parents had been preparing him for this moment his whole life. They had taught him that courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about doing what scared you anyway. The recognition Alex received didn't just come from his peers and teachers. It came from within himself. He realized that he had grown in ways he never expected. He had stepped into a space that had once felt terrifying and uncertain, and he had walked out the other side stronger, more confident, and more self-assured. It wasn't just about the debate. It was about everything that came with it. The courage to try, the willingness to face challenges head-on, and the ability to keep going even when things seemed impossible. By the end of the semester, Alex felt like a different person. He had discovered a strength in himself that he didn't know existed. And while the debate competition had been a big part of that transformation, it wasn't the end of his journey. It was just the beginning. Alex realized that the world was full of challenges, and there would always be moments when fear would try to hold him back. But now he knew that he didn't have to let that fear control him. He had faced one of his greatest fears, and he had come out the other side stronger for it. And as he looked ahead to the future, Alex knew that no matter what came next, he was ready to face it with the same courage and determination that had carried him through the debate. Weeks had passed since the debate competition, and the echoes of that day still resonated in Alex's mind. It wasn't the applause or the recognition he remembered most. It was the way it felt to stand in front of a crowd, to speak with conviction, and to challenge himself in ways he hadn't thought possible. The prize, the acknowledgement, it all felt secondary now. What truly mattered was the transformation he had gone through, the realization that he was capable of so much more than he had ever given himself credit for. Alex had always been the type to keep to himself, to avoid the spotlight whenever he could. He preferred the quiet comfort of books, the peaceful rhythm of studying, and the safety of being unnoticed. But now he felt like something inside him had shifted. He had proven to himself that he didn't have to stay hidden in the background. He didn't have to let fear control him anymore. At school, life had begun to take on a new rhythm. The students who had once seen him as the quiet, invisible kid were starting to treat him differently. They didn't just respect him for his courage in the debate. They saw him in a new light. They saw him as someone who had the strength to face fear and rise above it. Some students even started approaching him in the hallways, asking for his opinion on different topics. It was strange at first, but Alex welcomed it. It felt good to be heard, to be included in conversations he had once felt disconnected from. But it wasn't just the students who noticed the change. Teachers began to engage with him more as well. They asked for his thoughts in class, encouraged him to share his ideas during discussions, and offered him leadership roles in group projects. One teacher in particular, who had always been supportive but somewhat distant, pulled him aside one day after class. She looked at him with a warm smile and said, "Alex, you've come a long way. I can see the confidence in you now, the way you approach challenges. I'm really proud of how far you've come." Those words meant more to him than he could express. They weren't just a compliment. They were a recognition of his growth, of the journey he had been on. Alex had always been a quiet observer, someone who preferred to stay out of the limelight. But now he felt like he was stepping into his own. He was no longer afraid to share his thoughts, to speak up when he had something to say. And it wasn't because he wanted to prove anything to anyone. It was because he realized that his voice mattered, not just to others but to himself. The experience had changed Alex's perspective on so many things. He began to see challenges as opportunities rather than obstacles. Instead of avoiding situations that made him uncomfortable, he started embracing them. He signed up for a few more extracurricular activities, things he would have once shied away from. He joined a club that focused on community service, something he had always been interested in but never had the courage to pursue. And as he got involved, he found that the more he gave, the more he received. He began forming connections with others, friendships that went beyond surface-level interactions. People started to see him for who he truly was, not just the quiet kid in the back of the room, but someone who was thoughtful, compassionate, and capable of great things. One afternoon, as Alex was walking to his locker, he was approached by a group of students. They were the same group that had once laughed when he signed up for the debate competition. But now they were looking at him with respect. One of them, a student who had always been the loudest in class, spoke up. "Hey Alex, I just wanted to say that you really impressed me in the debate. I didn't think you had it in you, but you were great up there. I'm sorry for doubting you." The apology was unexpected and Alex wasn't sure how to respond at first. But after a moment he smiled and nodded. "Thanks, I appreciate it. It wasn't easy, but I'm glad I did it." It was a small moment, but it meant a lot to Alex. The same students who had once underestimated him were now acknowledging his courage. It wasn't just about the debate anymore. It was about recognizing that everyone had something valuable to offer, even if it wasn't always obvious at first glance. Alex had shown them that it wasn't about being the loudest or most outgoing. It was about having the courage to be yourself, to speak your truth, and to stand tall, even when everyone else doubts you. As the school year went on, Alex's confidence continued to grow. He found himself participating more in class discussions, sharing his thoughts without hesitation. His teachers began to see him as a leader, and his classmates began to seek his advice. The quiet kid in the back of the room was no longer just an observer. He was an active participant in his own life, shaping his future with each decision he made. At home, things were different too. His parents noticed the change in him, the way he carried himself with more self-assurance. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, his mother smiled and said, "I've noticed how much more confident you've been lately. I'm really proud of how you've handled everything, especially the debate." Alex felt a swell of pride at her words. His parents had always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. They had always encouraged him to take risks, to step outside his comfort zone, and now he was starting to see the fruits of that encouragement. He had taken that leap, and it had paid off in ways he never could have imagined. The realization that he was capable of more than he thought was a powerful one. Alex had always thought that he wasn't cut out for the spotlight, that he wasn't the kind of person who could take center stage. But now he understood that stepping into the spotlight didn't mean changing who you were. It meant showing up as yourself, being brave enough to face the unknown, and trusting that you had what it took to succeed. The lessons he had learned from the competition stayed with him long after the applause had faded. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, and there would be times when fear would try to hold him back. But now Alex understood that fear wasn't something to be avoided, it was something to be embraced. Fear was a sign that he was pushing himself beyond his limits, and that was where growth happened. As the school year came to a close, Alex felt a deep sense of gratitude. He was grateful for the opportunity to prove himself, for the courage he had found within himself, and for the support he had received along the way. But most of all, he was grateful for the person he had become. He wasn't just the quiet student anymore. He was someone who had faced his fears, stepped into his power, and discovered that he was capable of far more than he had ever imagined. And as he walked into the future, Alex knew that no matter what came next, he was ready to face it head-on, with the same courage and determination that had carried him through the debate competition and beyond.